the background information on the county's finances, do a brief overview of solutions that have been discussed over the past few years, and then provide perspective on the historic nature of the moment that we're in. After that, what we're going to do is a discussion with County Executive Crowley and Kristin Brey. Then we'll have a Q&A with audience members. So, with that, Rod, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Alec. Thanks to all of you for being here. Many of you are indulging me once again to hear about the Wisconsin Policy Forum's take on county finances. But I would submit to you that this is probably the most timely of all of my presentations on this topic over the years, considering the vote that is taking place tomorrow. So my role here this afternoon is just to give you a very brief primer, as this slide suggests, really as to why we are here today. Here we go. So, yeah, I've talked about this issue a lot over the years. Back in 2009, my organization used to be called the Public Policy Forum, and we produced this report entitled Crisis on the Horizon, looking at Milwaukee County's fiscal condition. Now, mind you, the state of county finances had been talked about a lot even well before 2009. The county pension scandal erupted in 2002, which really put county finances in a very precarious position. But even 7 years after that, the reason that we came in and did a report to assess the county's financial condition, this report, by the way, was commissioned by the Greater Milwaukee Committee. We have Joel Brennan, the president of the GMC, here with us this afternoon. It was because there was still disagreement between the executive branch of county government, which was then headed by Scott Walker, and the County Board of Supervisors, as to just how real this crisis was. So we were invited to come in, urged to come in by the Greater Milwaukee Committee to give our own independent assessment. And I hope you can just read this little passage on the screen. But what we were saying at that time was that we were really running out of time to just deal with this budget to budget. What the county needed was some real fundamental change, and that real fundamental change had to have everything on the table. Everything from new revenue sources to potentially having the county outsource or stop providing certain services that were not part of its core mission, to perhaps having to very reluctantly sell some of its capital assets. And so that was 2009. Since that time, lots of actions have been taken that have continued to stave off financial crisis from year to year. This slide just shows you a sampling. The county has indeed liquidated several of its assets, specifically several buildings that it owned. The county has cut more than 1,400 full-time equivalent employees over the past decade or more. The county has indeed outsourced some very important services. Most recently, behavioral health, inpatient, and crisis services. The county has totally revamped its healthcare offerings, restructured the way it provides employee and retiree healthcare, and saved tens of millions of dollars annually in doing that. Implemented employee pension contributions as a result of a directive from Wisconsin Act 10, and implemented a new very important source of local revenue, which is a $30 vehicle registration fee. So lots of actions have been taken. On top of that, the county has been very fortunate to receive considerable sums of money, first back in 2009 and 2010 under the Obama administration stimulus plan, and much more recently, tens of millions, actually hundreds of millions of dollars in pandemic relief aid. Nevertheless, there's a but here. Oops, wrong way. Still, the county is on the precipice of some severe financial disorder. A revenue problem remains. What this slide is showing you is the structure that we have set up, we being the state of Wisconsin. State leaders put into motion this structure all the way back in 1911. No, I was not the president of the forum at that time. I was a young researcher at the time. But we made a very deliberate decision as a state. We were going to allow state government to levy an income tax. We were the first state in the nation to have a statewide income tax. couple decades later, we made a similar decision regarding the sales tax, and what our state leader said was, we are going to preserve the authority to levy those taxes with ourselves, and in return, we are going to make a commitment to our local units of government, municipalities and counties, that we are going to share the proceeds from those revenue sources with them. In the late 1980s, an exception was made for counties, a small exception. Counties were allowed to do a half-cent sales tax. So this is the structure that we set up. This structure ensures that our county governments will be extremely reliant on a single source of local revenue, the property tax, as well as intergovernmental revenue, which in the case of counties is mostly a variety of different forms of state aid. Some of those are federal monies passed through by the state. So, when you set up a structure like that, you should be prepared to ensure, in order to allow your local units of governments to meet their inflationary expenditure needs, that you're going to see at least some inflationary growth in those key revenue sources that you've established, the property tax and state aids, intergovernmental revenues. Well, in the case of the property tax levy, the state of Wisconsin has been very successful over the past decade or more in limiting overall property tax levy growth, but there's been a consequence. Property tax levy growth for local units of government is tied to the annual rate of increase in net new construction. I'm not going to get into the details of what that actually means, but what this slide is showing you is that just taking the 2014 to 2023 period, we've seen about 12% growth in the county's property tax over that time. Now, some of that limited growth is directly attributed to that property tax levy cap. There are some elements of that limited growth that was a decision by county policymakers over the years. But suffice it to say that that very key local revenue source for the county, that growth has been heavily restricted. We're also showing you the comparison of the sales tax. The sales tax, again, the county gets a ½ cent of the 5.5 cent sales tax. There's a 5 cent state sales tax right now. There's about to be a 2 cent city of Milwaukee sales tax, and maybe, depending on the vote tomorrow, 0.4 cent additional county tax. As you can see, that's not an insignificant source of revenue for the county, that ½ cent sales tax. That has seen some growth because sales tax revenue grows, particularly in a high inflation environment, as prices grow on sales taxable goods and services, so do sales tax revenues. But that property tax has seen very limited growth. And then the other part of the equation is that the county's key state revenue streams, in this case we are showing you general transportation aids, shared revenue, basic community aids, which are used to fund human services programs, and mass transit operating assistance. These are 4 of the foremost intergovernmental revenues on which the county relies. And these are not adjusted for inflation. It would be very difficult for me to show flatter revenue streams than these 4 streams. Between 2013 and 2023, we have seen essentially no growth in these state aids. So if you set up a system where your government is heavily reliant on 2 main revenue sources, and those 2 main revenue sources do not grow with inflation, then you're going to have financial challenges. In particular, when you are faced with a situation when your costs, your fixed costs, are growing at a greater rate than inflation, that's when it becomes an even more serious problem. In the case of the county, as we project forward, while the county has done a lot to get its fringe benefit costs under control, the projection is that these costs are going to continue to increase rather substantially. And so the situation that the county has faced year after year after year after year, really dating all the way back to 2002, we're only showing you as far back as 2014, is that every year there is a funding gap. Every year, because of the structural financial problem the county has, there's a gap between the anticipated revenues for the coming year and the anticipated expenditure needs if the county is to sustain all existing programs at current levels. The good news is, as you can see from the year after year look at this, that structural gap, with the exception of 2021, has been on a downward trend. As I said, the county has done a lot to get its fringe benefit costs under control. The county has done a lot to shrink its physical footprint. The county has cut positions where it could. But arguably, a $12.6 million gap, which was the gap heading into 2023, is more difficult to address than, say, in 2023 than a $31 million gap in 2018, because you've already been cutting year after year after year. And so this, again, just illustrates what the fundamental problem is. This was a typical county budget year. We use 2022. This is 2022, not 2023, because the county saw unusual sales tax growth in 2023 because of the high rate of inflation. But in a typical year, the county faces general costs to continue its existing programs and services that are essentially linked to inflation. It faces some increase in its healthcare and pension costs. In years back in the previous decade, pension and healthcare costs were growing at about a combined $20 million per year. Again, the costs are better under control, having only $6.2 million of growth, which is about 2 or 3% in healthcare and pension costs, is pretty good, but it's still a decent-sized number. In this particular year, the county was looking to give 1.5% cost of living adjustments to its employees. And so you can see these are sort of the fixed costs that the county faces in a given year. And then we can look at the typical growth in its local revenue streams, and they pale by comparison. So that's why every year there's a funding gap, and every year it gets more difficult to bridge that gap. So looking now again out to the future and where things stand, in addition to having that stubborn 10 to 15 to $20 million structural gap, there are two really big problems that have emerged. One is a looming cliff for the Milwaukee County transit system. That is the one area of the county budget where county policymakers have had little choice but to plug in the federal pandemic relief dollars that they received to sustain transit services at the height of the pandemic and as we are emerging from the pandemic in the hope that ridership is going to rebound. Ridership revenue is a key component of revenue for the Milwaukee County transit system. Ridership obviously declined precipitously at the height of the pandemic. It has yet to fully rebound, and so the federal government said to transit systems across the country, we're going to give you a pool of dollars that you can insert into your system budget to sustain your service levels in the hope that when those dollars are gone, which in this case will be by the end of 2024, your ridership will have rebounded sufficiently so that you'll be okay. Well, in this case, ridership is not expected to rebound sufficiently so that they'll be okay. What this is showing you in a very complicated figure here is that there's a roughly $18 to $26 million hole that will emerge in the transit system budget alone by 2025. And then the other very big looming problem for the county is in terms of its capital improvement needs. Another part of the county's success story, another way that it's been able to get by year after year since 2002, is that it has dramatically reduced the size of its capital program. The county has billions of dollars worth of capital assets. They get old, they need to be replaced. We're thinking about parks, we're thinking about buses, we're thinking about county trunk highways and parks roadways. We're talking about the range of county buildings. The county ought to be spending probably $80 to $100 million per year and should have been throughout the last decade to properly maintain those assets. But in order to limit its debt service costs, the county set a cap for itself, and that orange line shows that the county essentially limits itself to spending about $40 to $45 million, to borrowing about $40 to $45 million each year to support its capital program. What this is showing you is the difference between that orange line, which is what the county deems affordable, and the compilation of the dollar amounts of the requests, the capital requests coming in from county departments. You can see there's a big gap. When that gap is not addressed, a backlog grows, and what this is essentially showing you is that there's about a $1 billion capital backlog for the county that at this point in time, it really does not have a plan for addressing because it doesn't have the revenue streams to address. So, in hopefully around 10 minutes or so, I've given my best effort to summarize the county's financial challenges. I will now turn it over to Alex to get on the program.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate the presentation. And thank you for just consistently being willing to share your expertise with the Crowley and Kristin Brey. So Kristin is a writer, video creator, and host of the radio show As Goes Wisconsin. On her show, Kristin discusses state and local politics in a way that is approachable and helps inspire further civic engagement. So today, we're going to be talking about this historic opportunity that's in front of the Milwaukee County Board tomorrow, whether or not to adopt a 0.4% local option sales tax, which is going to allow us to preserve critical county services. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kristin. I'll give you the microphone here, County Executive.
All right. You ready for this?
I am.
Well, that was great, Rob. I mean, I actually have a series that I used to do of summarizing Wisconsin Policy Farm Reports because only nerds read Wisconsin Policy Farm Reports, and that is a great example of what great policy research you guys do in trying to break it down, because a lot of that I did not know. And so what I want to focus on right now, though, is the vote that is ahead of us, which is tomorrow. And before we kind of go into what it gets to vote, sure.
Well, COVID isn't necessarily gone, but
So, before we get into what yes vote or no vote means for tomorrow, how did we get here? Since you've been in office, you've been working on this,
Yes.
but as far as negotiations, like, bring us up to date, because we know that it just passed in the Common Council for the sales tax for the city, and this is separate for the county. So kind of just put us on the foundation a little bit.
absolutely. So I was first and foremost, thank you so much, Kristin, for doing this. Thank you, Rob. Thank you all for being here. A lot of this predates me even being county executive. And so when we talk about the structural deficit, even as Rob alluded to, we've been having this conversation for many decades, for at least 2 decades. But I remember when I was in state legislature, 2019, the Milwaukee County was talking to us about the need for additional revenue. And I began to talk about it, talk with my colleagues, and I got to give a major shout out to former state senator Dale Kuyanga for all of his support, because he actually authored the very first legislation around this and got it introduced in 2020, early 2020, and I had the opportunity to speak to a committee. Fast forward, as I was running for this office, I knew that this was critical. As somebody who served as a legislative aide for the Milwaukee County Board, as an aide in the state Senate, and as an elected official, I knew that this is something that we had to tackle. This was the single biggest threat facing Milwaukee County. And so the mayor and I, first and foremost, we started to go on a road trip. You know, when you think about making sure that we help out Milwaukee, you can't do this alone. We know that we have been the political lightning rod, Democrats and Republicans all across the state. And so we needed to, one, hit a reset button and really change the narrative and really tell our story about what we have done and what we need to really move not only our community forward, but to move the entire state forward. And so we began to work with even more legislators, letting them know what was on our books, letting them know what was happening with the pension, the backlog, so on and so forth. And at first I would say that, many people may not have believed us until we showed them the books. And I think everybody went, whoa, you have a major problem. And that's how we got here. And I would say that it took months of negotiating. The mayor, myself, the county council president, Jose Perez, as well as the chairwoman, Marcelia Nicholson, for at least 2 to 3 months, went to Madison negotiating with leadership, Republican leadership, as well as Democratic leadership, and the governor's office to get to this point. And I'm just glad we're here.
Me too. All right, so the vote's tomorrow.
Votes tomorrow.
And in a lot of different ways, I'm going to ask this in a lot of different ways. But I guess in the most simple way, increase of 0.4 on sales tax, what does that mean for Milwaukee's budget? What does it get spent on? Where does it go?
Absolutely. So an increase in Milwaukee County's budget means an increase in the quality of life and being able to maintain the quality of life for all of our residents who live in Milwaukee County, but also more importantly, I would say more importantly, but as importantly, our visitors and those who work here will be able to maintain that quality of life. So for Milwaukee County, for 2 years in a row, we have been deemed of having the lowest unsheltered homeless population 2 years in a row. We're going to be able to maintain these types of programs. When you think about our Department of Health and Human Services, services for people with disabilities, services for our seniors, services for our young people, we're not only going to be able to maintain, but we're going to be able to make investments, as well as our crown jewel in our parks all around Milwaukee County, as well as our public transit. So this is really about making sure that we're putting our community in the best place possible to make sure that we're delivering for all of our residents across the county.
And when would it take place?
So if we get the vote, vote happens tomorrow, if it gets passed, we will be able to actually begin to collect this tax starting in January of 2024.
Which is the same as the city tax.
It's the same as the city tax, yes.
And so, on the flip side, what happens if there's a no vote tomorrow? I guess both procedurally, but also what does that mean for the state, for the county?
Absolutely. Well, I would say that a no vote is really going to put many of our programs and services basically on the chopping block in a sense. So we will not be able to make the quality investments that we want to be able to make. Matter of fact, a no vote is yes to cutting our public transit. It's a yes to cutting our parks department. It's a yes to cutting the services and the programs that increase and maintain the quality of life that everybody deserves all across Milwaukee County. But even when you think about Milwaukee County, we are the nerve system of the public safety continuum. When you think about the courthouse. So if we want to make sure that justice is not being slowed down, this is the ability to make sure that we can make those investments.
Procedurally, is there any recourse, or is it done, like, we have an answer tomorrow, whether or not this is happening?
Well, I would hope so. We'll have an answer tomorrow. But if it fails, we have to bring this back, which means that it delays our ability to actually collect the sales tax, which means that we will start to begin to lose money as Milwaukee County, which means that we're going to have to look at some tougher decisions to make in the future.
Absolutely. So, kind of both the county sales tax discussion and the city sales tax discussion have been happening mostly in parallel. Obviously, their vote was earlier this month. What are the differences? Because I think it's kind of gotten lumped together a lot, besides some numbers of 2% versus 0.4%. But what would you say is important for people who are watching the live stream, people who are here right now, to understand is the difference between what's happening with the city versus what's happening with the county?
Well, great question, and I truly appreciate that because there are a lot of differences related to particularly the policy and even the numbers for the city and Milwaukee County. So one, city of Milwaukee they're leveraging a 2% sales tax. We're leveraging a 0.4% sales tax. Milwaukee County, we do have there's a policy provision that says that we can't spend more than 5% of our total budget on cultural institutions. But to put that in perspective, this last budget we spent less than 1% on cultural institutions. So we don't anticipate that really affecting us. The other thing is when it comes down to net new positions, that means that we have to have a 2/3 vote of the Milwaukee County Board to create new positions, net new positions. The other thing is this difference between the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. The city of Milwaukee has provisions that does not allow them to use their tax levy to pay for diversity, equity, and inclusion officer positions. We do not have that restriction at Milwaukee County. And I know that there have been some heartburn. It gives me heartburn as well to see the policy related to the contract with minority-owned businesses and things of that nature. That really doesn't affect Milwaukee County because we cannot give preferential treatment. Matter of fact, it's federal law that said that we can't do that anyway. So this does not hinder our ability to do the contracting and do the work that we do with swimweeds all across Milwaukee County. But this does, again, it gives us the ability to continue to make those investments everywhere else. Those are the main provisions off the top of my head that I can think of. But I guess the other thing is that those savings, the city of Milwaukee, they have to put those towards fire and police and EMS public safety. We have a little bit more flexibility on how we'll be able to allocate those dollars.
So it's not straight voting like the sheriff's department.
No.
So you kind of alluded to it, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. The relationship between the Republicans in Madison and both the city and the county of Milwaukee have not always been cordial. You worked in Madison, so is that a fair way to frame it? So what has been what has the process been like, as much as you can get into it, of, like you said, months of negotiation? Not everyone was happy with the restrictions that have been put on this, like some of them you just spoke about. Kind of pull back the curtain a little bit about what that process was like.
Well, I would say for me, this process has been a 7-year process.
Right. So you're pretty good there.
So I got my first start in the state legislature in 2013, and I think about Teddy Roosevelt, the quote is, "No one cares what you know until they know how much you care." And so it's really about building relationships outside of our own geographical comfort zone. So going to Madison, utilizing those relationships that I've had, personal relationships, right? Authentic relationships, being able to have a conversation of what we have been doing and my plans for our community as we begin to move forward. But we also want to fit within the big picture of Milwaukee County, within the state of Wisconsin. Milwaukee County, we are the largest economic engine of the state. But it's hard to say that without feeling like you're beating on your chest. So we have to show that we're partners in this. How do we support other communities across the state? And I think as we began to go around and tour and talk about the need for the additional sales tax, I think many communities understood the need that they also had as it relates to their levy limits. That's one of the reasons why it was a statewide package as it relates to increasing shared revenue for everyone and giving us the ability to leverage a local option sales tax. And I would tell you that, no, a lot of this was not easy. Having many different conversations, tough conversations, going back and forth. I would say that you all here, I became county executive because I wanted to leave Madison. I didn't know I'd be going up there as much as I have been. But it was a great experience because I think that the ball is starting to roll in one, hitting that reset button, changing the narrative of who Milwaukee is to the state of Wisconsin. And I will tell you that it's still a learning process, right? We still have conversations that we have to have. But particularly when it comes down to local government, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whether you don't give a damn about politics, people want to make sure that their garbage gets picked up. They want to make sure that a public safety officer shows up when they are dialing for assistance. They want to make sure that their quality of life is being maintained. And that's what we brought to the table. And I think that's one of the reasons why we were able to get it over the finish line within the state legislature.
What grade would you give the relationship between the Republicans in Madison and Milwaukee right now?
The grade? Incomplete.
Fair. So the other criticism of the sales tax, both for city and county, has been that inherently sales tax is regressive. And obviously Milwaukee County, city of Milwaukee, there is a vulnerable population that this will disproportionately affect. And so how do you get over that obstacle when we're talking about this, of how this will potentially disproportionately affect people who are struggling the most?
Absolutely. I think about even, my own family. I didn't grow up rich. I didn't grow up, with having all means. So I understand the issues that many people may have as it relates to the sales tax. And as many people talk about it being regressive, no, I can identify with that. When you think about Milwaukee County, we are the social service agency of Milwaukee County. We are an extension of the state who are there to provide that safety net when somebody falls down. And so when you think about it from that perspective, if we had to cut our Milwaukee County transit system, how would people get to school? How would they get to their medical appointments? How would they even get to work? If we had to cut all of our parks, Milwaukee County, I don't know if you can go anywhere in the entire country where you are probably a mile within any park. You could probably walk to any park right in our community. Not being able to maintain our parks, that can have a devastating toll on people's mental health as well as physical health. And I think that was very well apparent when you think about what we witnessed and what we went through with the COVID-19 pandemic. Being able to assist those with housing needs, being able to make sure that we can get those who are unsheltered into a home and making sure they get all the services and resources they need, that's extremely important. And so what's even more regressive is if we are not able to provide the programs and services that so many in our community, our most vulnerable constituents, absolutely rely on. If we're not there for them, well, who are we going to be here for? And that's extremely important in why we need the local option sales tax, because it not only addresses the scale, but it's also the cheapest option that we have available in making sure that we can fill the gap to provide these services.
Do you feel like, even if this passes tomorrow, that the educational campaign with that message needs to continue? Because the ability to be like, oh, my taxes are going up, everything's more expensive. Do you think that needs to continue to be that ability?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Tomorrow's it'll be a good day, but it's not the finish line for all of us. We still need to go out and educate the public on what this really means, because there are people who are for it, there are people who are against it, there are people who are just like, it's whatever. But it's extremely important that people have a better understanding of how this is going to allow Milwaukee County to actually increase the quality of life for everybody. No matter where you live, no matter what corner of the county you're in, we're going to be able to make some investments.
And then my final question, I know we're gonna open it up to everyone who's here. Why has there been less conversation around what this does? Like, I've only been back in Milwaukee and Wisconsin for 3 years. And I think about living in Milwaukee and how many people commute here, how many people visit here. We were just at Harley Homecoming, and like the thousands of people who came into town, people who go to Brewers games, people who go to Bucks games. And like the ability to talk about a tax on people who take advantage and enjoy the city, enjoy the county, and I feel like that's been kind of lost in the conversation. And and you guys talk more about that, like what we can expect from people who are visiting for the day or the weekend, but also like, why do you think that's kind of gotten lost?
Well, one, I don't think anybody likes counting everybody else's money anymore. But I think that everybody is worried about, their finances. I mean, it's been a tough time. We're, coming over after the pandemic, and, people don't necessarily believe in government the way that they used to. And so people are just have some distrust in the system itself. But I will say that that's our job as political leaders, as community leaders, as business leaders, is to go out there, and one is to really educate the community. I mean, there's been a lot of rhetoric around the sales tax, and I think what's extremely important for me is to really go out there and we can have those tough conversations. We can talk about the bad things that are in there, and we need to acknowledge it. But we also need to acknowledge that this is a conversation that we've been having for almost 20 years. In Milwaukee County, the city of Milwaukee, and communities all across the state have not seen an increase in their local tax levies and shared revenue to be able to provide for their constituents. The fact of the matter is that this is a historic moment for all of us. And this is going to be able to put us on the best footing, financial footing that we have ever seen in the past 20 years. But we have to continue to have those conversations. Are these tough conversations? Yes. But if we want to make sure that Milwaukee County can be the best, the brightest that it's ever been, we need to make sure that this local option sales tax is enabled to give us the ability to quality investments.
All right, final question. What's your confidence level?
My confidence level?
Confidence level.
I'm confident.
Yeah,
I'm
confident about tomorrow?
I'm confident. I'm still lobbying. I'm still talking to folks. This is a lifestyle. This is a lot of work, but it's extremely important for me to make sure that the community I grew up in, the community that I represent, the community that I work for is in the best position possible, and not just to take care of themselves, but for future generations moving forward.
Okay. Well, that's all I have. You want to come back up? We can open it up.
Sure. All right, so thank you, County Executive Kristin, for discussion. And so now we can open up for Q&A. I'll walk around the microphone for folks so that we can all hear the questions, if there are any. So questions?
I'll take the question.
Thank you for all that you do first off. For seeing how amazing the Harley event was for the city, is it public knowledge of what that check was, what they paid to the county for that event, or how much did the county profit off that event? And is the county willing to do more large-scale events like that in Veterans Park?
Great question. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I think we're still probably calculating that. But even when I give you a different perspective. I think when we had the Bucks championship run, it was about $30 million that was spent all across Milwaukee County. And you talk about 0.5% of that. Well, 10% of $30 million is what? Anybody know math? $3 million. And then you do half of that, right? You got 1.5 million. Then you got to do half of that, right? I mean, we don't make a lot of money. So I think it was about $300,000 in taxes that we collected during that $30 million run. And so to put that in perspective, $300,000 doesn't give you one county bus. A county bus costs anywhere between $800,000 and $950,000. So when you think about this really giving us the ability to make some proper investments, it's going to give us that ability, especially with the fact that it's also going to give us the ability to get rid of the looming pension crisis that we've had hovering over our head for 20 years.
Thank you, County Executive. Two questions, one for you, one for Rob. What is the dollar equivalency in a normalized year like 22 of the 0.4%?
So based off of I want to say the state numbers, but I think this is also reported on, you will get correct me if I'm wrong, 80 million, about $80 million from the 0.4% increase.
Now, Rob, you did a presentation maybe a few years ago, and you showed Milwaukee relative to other comparable cities, where we were totally reliant on the property tax. We didn't have our tools, whether it was parking or sales, et cetera. With this tax, where do we fall now in the mix? We were, obviously way off to the left. Where does this put us?
Thanks, Linda. So I can't tell you where the county would be. We took a look at the largest city in 10 Midwestern states. When you look at our sales tax, I want to say we're either number 9 or 10. If, including the city 2%, if we do both of those, we'll be somewhere in the middle in terms of sales tax. So.
David, this certainly has taught us all a lot of lessons about advocacy, and you and the mayor have done a fabulous job. I think a lot of us got very cynical, me included, having worked in Madison, about the ability of the public sector and the Milwaukee business community to move things in a Republican-dominated legislature. And I think that's been one of the real changes over the last 15, 20 years. Some of it can be contributed or attributed to the way districts are drawn, and who is really malleable or who can be affected by that. But we've, even though some of us were cynical about that, with your and the mayor's leadership and lots of others participating, we got something done that everybody kind of stood together and advocated for. If we can get this over the line, what's next? What do we need to advocate for as a community moving forward? How do we make sure, what do the people in the business community need to know that public sector needs them standing by for as we move forward?
Great question. Well, the first thing that really comes to mind is really our Milwaukee County transit system. Rob alluded to it. We're still going to be seeing close to about a $25 million deficit in the next 2 years when it comes down to transit. But transit is one of the lifebloods programs and the most used amenities that we have. But it's also a non-mandated service. And so making sure that public transit is maintained with the current level of services, I would say, is going to be probably one of the next biggest things that we're going to be focusing on. Is going to need a lot of help, not just from the business community, but from advocates, community organizations, everyone, to talk about how important this is, because we still don't have a dedicated funding source for our county transit system. So I would say that would be one of the next big things that we could all come together on to advocate for at the state level.
I have a follow-up transit question. Recently there was a report about being a gap for what MCTS is able to do with the budget they have. And just to be clear, MCTS does an amazing job with the budget that they have. Is there any consideration of long-term funding opportunities, whether it's federal grants or private investment from organizations like Lime Scooters, to support MCTS and the gap that they have going forward?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had this conversation for many years going on to the state legislature, right? I mean, I ride Lime, and there are individuals, particularly people with disabilities, who don't have that ability to ride those types of things. So personally, I would like to see a surcharge to make sure that we still have those fixed routes for individuals who don't have the ability or the capability of being able to utilize different modes of transportation. But we have to be creative, and it's going to take a partnership with the state in making sure that we can maintain and increase the productivity of our county transit system. And we're going to continue to do that. I would say that our Office of Special Projects and Grants Office have been doing phenomenal work, and they have been bringing millions, tens of millions of dollars back to Milwaukee County. So we're going to continue to utilize that office and our DOT to identify other opportunities at the federal level. But we need that partnership at the state level to make sure, one, that the $20 million, the transit dollars that were removed from transportation into the GPR fund are not further reduced, and we can see increases in the future.
Any more questions? No? Oh.
County Executive, just want to thank you, Stephanie Manning from City Year, for all the work that you have done in trying to get this pushed through. We have the privilege of working with about 80 young people that have come into the city to serve and really need that public transportation to get to the schools to be of service to scholars. And I feel like this, when it is passed, and everyone should be working to make sure it is passed tomorrow, to support that. My question is, what else is it that we need to do to ensure that that public transportation is available for young people coming into this city to serve? How do we do a better job of telling that narrative, and how do we support you better in the work that you are doing to make sure that's available for our citizens?
Absolutely, great question. I mean, advocacy. It's one, working with the Milwaukee County Board and myself, helping to tell the story, and not just tell the story within our community, but tell that story in Madison, in the state capital, so they understand the type of lifeline our Milwaukee County transit system actually is to our entire community. We have to talk about it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are the largest, we are the most diverse community in the state of Wisconsin, and we need to maintain our quality of life in order for other communities in the state of Wisconsin to be able to succeed. So we have to continue to tell our stories and really get involved civically. Politics, as growing up, I was always told it's a full contact sport. If you're not in the game, you're sitting on the sideline, people say don't complain, but we need everybody, particularly young people, right? Because I would argue that they are not our future, they are our now. And the more and more that they get involved and get their friends involved, the more they can probably scare many of the elected officials that represent them to actually make certain types of decisions. But it's really about continuously to advocate, to lobby, continue to tell the story, and more importantly, talk about what it would look like if we don't receive the necessary funding, which will only be detrimental to our most vulnerable populations that live within the county.
Any other questions for the county executive? Okay, well, there will be an opportunity for networking across the way, but before we end, county executive, is there any words you'd like to leave the group with, or just final messages to share?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you all for really coming out to learn more about this issue, but also to those who are out there working on this issue. We truly appreciate you. But we still have time to make phone calls. So if you got time, please call your county supervisor, write, email, tweet, Facebook, tap them on the shoulder, come down to the courthouse, and let them know why this is extremely important. And let them know that you are going to support them. This is a tough vote. Going out here to talk about this is extremely tough, and I acknowledge that. But if we don't do what's right for this community, the community will come back and ask us what the heck happened, because they elected us to actually make these tough decisions to make sure that their quality of life is maintained. So that's what we need to do. Again, thank you so much for all that you do, and please feel free to reach out to my office for anything that we can help as it relates to not even the next 24 hours. So thank you.
County executive, thank you.